IVM.
Hi and welcome to Your Kanoon. This is Amber from Amber Rana Ventures, and there's another edition of the immigration series on Your Kanoon where I have my special friends from Green and Spiegel, Shannon and Claire. I would actually do the honors of letting them introduce themselves rather than me, because I wouldn't be able to do justice to their profiles. They're well-experienced, seasoned lawyers just like us who handle the daily immigration queries from people around the world as far as their permanent residency is concerned. So Shannon and Claire, welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here. And our alliance with Green and Spiegel has been absolutely magical till now. And now I'd like you to introduce yourselves, please, so that we can do justice to your stature and to the work you do.
Hi, nice to meet you. Thanks so much for having us. I'm Shannon Kampf, and I am an immigration lawyer with Green and Spiegel. And I've been practicing for, I think, about 13 years now, wow, exclusively in immigration. So that's what I do every day of my life.
Well, 13 years is just that. Shannon's a very, very seasoned lawyer, you can say, with 13 years of experience in a particular field. Over to you now, Claire. We'd love to have you also. And please, could you just give us, your intro to our audience today?
Sure. Hi, Amber. My name's Claire, and I'm an immigration lawyer with Green and Spiegel in Toronto, Ontario. I've been practicing Canadian immigration law for about 5 years now, and my practice focuses on permanent residency in Canada. So thank you so much for having us. We're so happy to be here.
Well, thank you so much, guys. In fact, why I've had you here is because my application still hasn't come through. So maybe I can just steal all that advice from you guys instead of going to Stephen, free of cost. All right, that's great. So, guys, today's episode is going to be all about permanent residency being in a limbo because of how COVID has impacted people around the world. The pandemic has set in. It's not going anywhere for sure, even next year, at least as far as I see. A lot of people are prospective applicants who've gone through the process and haven't received their PR. And I like Shannon to come in and start, and maybe then you, Claire. What do you think is the forecast? There are students who are stuck. There are permanent residents. But Canada has invited them. They've got their PRs, but they cannot travel. And then there are people who are in the pipeline who are looking to, just file their immigration, especially under express entry. And they haven't been able to do that because there are no draws coming out likely. Shannon, what would you have to say about that?
Yeah, well, I actually might defer some of this to Claire because she's more of an expert in the permanent residence, and I do much more of the temporary. But we can certainly talk about, generally the impact of COVID and the pandemic has really impacted immigration. All aspects of it. We have, I do a lot of temporary residence, and the logistics of handling those files right now is quite challenging. People are stuck, applications are stuck. There's a lot of steps of the process that can't be completed right now. And then, as you mentioned, people who are stuck overseas with permanent residence applications pending, they're also waiting and they're stuck. And I'm sure Claire can give more detail about that. But definitely from a logistical perspective, it's really impacted our work and how we do things. And we're struggling to get people to Canada who normally would be able to come here. And every step of the way is more complicated. So people used to get the approval, get on a plane and come, and that's just not what we do now, right? Even if we can manage to get the approval, we have to look at what are the travel restrictions, who can come, who can't, who's exempt from the travel restrictions, what about the family members, what step we might need to get them special approval. So there's so many impacts to particular, like I said, the logistics of getting people here and how to handle those applications. Really, everything's quite changed.
No, absolutely. And Shannon, I'll come to the temporary residence and the work permits part as well, because a lot of my clientele is going through that phase, and we'll cover it. And also a lot of Indians who are looking to, have the intercompany transfer and stuff like that in bag. Claire, since you're the permanent, you're the person who's going to solve my problem, I suppose. So I'll put it to you, Claire. What do you have to say about the permanent residency program in 2021, and how do we see it going? Because I've heard a lot of complaints. There are groups here in India, on Telegram, on other such platforms where they've formed communities about them being stuck for more than over a year now, and no movement of their files, no response from the system. How has it been your experience, and what can you tell our audience actually?
That's absolutely right. That's similar to what we're seeing for a lot of our clients who are overseas. And Canada has basically throughout the past year tried to balance an ambitious immigration target plan with protection of public health. And basically how they're doing that is focusing on transitioning people who are already inside of Canada to permanent resident status, rather than bringing in foreign nationals from other countries for permanent residency. Right. And how that has kind of played out is two ways. Firstly, it's resulted in a pause on invitations to apply through express entry being issued to most individuals who don't already have a year of Canadian work experience. And it's also resulted in a pause on processing and finalizing applications for those individuals who aren't currently in Canada. So right now we're seeing a lot of both temporary and permanent residency applications for foreign nationals basically being put on pause for the foreseeable future until they're actually able to travel to Canada under the travel restrictions that are currently in force.
No, Claire, and rightly put by you, there is also this permutation and combination which Shannon also highlighted, that, well, you might be approved, but then there are these bunch of 8-9 conditions, which anyone can go up and read on the IRCC website. I want to bring in the importance of an agent and how they ruin your application, and the importance of a lawyer and how they save you from being destroyed, because in Asia, I think it's a major challenge that people depend heavily on agents. And since I started working with Green and Spiegel, as our overseas partners, we've tried to channelize some work here. And out of my clientele, what I've realized is agents have been telling them to file under express entry in PNP, but there hasn't been a single draw for months and months. Now you're putting people into, kind of a backlog, right? When you ask them to log in their files, because the profiles are active for a period of 1 year, I suppose. And when they put in, there's no draw happening. And there's just a huge loggerhead and with no outcome at all. So what would you suggest to such people? Because these agents are doing this in India. What do you suggest to them? How about somebody should go about this?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So when you submit the profile, it will stay valid for 1 year. But just by virtue of being able to submit a profile does not mean that applicant will be invited. Now, right now, we don't know when the draws for foreign nationals will resume under the express entry program. So if that candidate does have a competitive score, they may very well wish to put their profile into the pool. But for those candidates who have lower scores, under the 400s, there may not be too much utility for putting the profile into the pool now, because we do not anticipate anytime soon that express entry score will drop below the 400s for foreign nationals. So what I would say is be very careful when you are working with an immigration representative. There are certain immigration representatives that are authorized to provide Canadian immigration law advice. So you want to make sure that whoever you're working with is authorized under the Immigration Act to provide that advice. And you are very clear on what your strategy moving forward is. We want to make sure that the nuances between the eligibility to submit the profile and the likelihood of receiving an invitation are well understood by that applicant, because certainly we don't want that person to have an expectation of being invited to apply and becoming a permanent resident within a year if there's really no likelihood that would be the case.
No, absolutely, Claire. And my audience should very well, and this is something we reiterate. I again and again reiterate to listeners that please be very mindful. There's nothing happening on the immigration front as far as these programs are concerned. So be very mindful. Shannon, I'll come to you now, and then I'll come to Claire again with my rest of the questions. Shannon, the biggest problem that I face is people looking for intercompany transfers. So many cases around the world where people just quickly want to move due to so many reasons. They've got a job offer, they've got, they got married in Canada maybe, and now they want to move because of their spouse or so forth, so on. Or people who are looking to open up businesses, set up a business and then look for an intercompany transfer. They're entrepreneurs. What can you say about that situation? Because a work permit, which was taking 6 weeks to process, is now overdue by 2 years also in certain cases where I do have a client I refer to Green and Spiegel, which was, they helped him out, but 18 months of waiting. It started in 2020, February, I think, when he filed in, then everything just got backlogged. And it's been now almost July and we haven't heard back on anything. And the client's been pursuing. So what do you have to say about this? I mean, how is this situation going to change?
Well, it's interesting because we've really seen some movement, like some changes and some fluctuations over the past, I guess, almost year and a half. So this time last year, we were stuck, right? The files were stuck. They weren't moving. Right. And then they kind of opened up again at a certain point and started resuming the processing. And I would say in about January, a lot of the cases we were handling started to go into almost normal processing times for those based in India.
Right.
And now we've been shut back down in that again. So, I mean, it's definitely impacted. And of course, it's a very serious situation and the government needs to do what they need to do to help people and keep people safe. So there's no question about that. But it does impact things. So currently, the visa application centers are all closed in India.
Right.
And this causes definitely putting things, all the pending files are essentially on hold while they wait for those to resume because they can't complete biometrics, which is a major part of an application. So once we file an application online, the applicant has to go and complete their biometrics in person at a visa application center. And that can't be done right now. And the other thing that can't be done is submitting the passport. So we have many people at different stages like that, and they just can't. So it's just sitting, and waiting. We're just waiting for things to reopen at this point. The other challenge is that people need to complete medical exams, and that also has shut down. So people who mostly shut down. So normally we would have people go and do medicals and we can't do that right now. Whereas this time last year, even though things were shut down, they could at least do a medical and we could file it with an upfront medical. That wasn't an issue then. So it's definitely, facing some challenges. We have a lot of files on hold. We're still proceeding, our clients still want us to submit applications. And I think that's a good idea to get the applications in the queue at least, so that once things resume, and they will, we at least, I think on the permanent side, it's a little unknown, but I think on the intercompany work permit side, we do know at some point they will resume and we will be able to move forward because it really is these logistical issues at this point in time. But it's that's what I do. I do intercompany transfers all the time, particularly for people in India. And it is to talk about what Claire is saying, it is a good way. I mean, that's a more feasible way right now to get to Canada if you have that option. And then you fall into that group that Claire's talking about who are already here gaining Canadian experience and perhaps falling more into a category of permanent residents that might have an opportunity to move forward.
No, absolutely, Shannon. And, on the work permit side, I also wanted to ask you, students, that's one of the major concerns for us, that students who moved to Canada, let's say, or students who are in India currently, but due to pandemic, their courses have gone online, right? And they have these queries all the time that how do they process their post-graduation work permit? And is it going to be the same? And how does that work? And has there been a pendency in that as well, or is it still on point with regards to those students maybe who enrolled in the fall last year or early summers? And because I keep getting these queries on the show that talk about this, like you have a huge chunk of students moving in from India every year, and some of them have a query about their work permit. That what do we do? I mean, we have completed our course, but our work permit is still in limbo, right?
Right. Yeah, that's a challenge for sure. And people, haven't been able to travel to Canada to start their studies. And for a while, they weren't allowing it. I mean, now they should, if they're enrolled in a designated learning institution, they should be able to, and they have a plan in place. They should be able to come to Canada. And it's probably a good idea if you can. Come to Canada and get settled, and then I think it'll facilitate postgrad work permits down the road. But there are a lot of I will say that the Canadian government has reacted with a number of policies to facilitate certain scenarios. The challenges that we meet. I know I've complained about the logistical measures and what we're facing, but in terms of policies, like there are policies in place to facilitate the post-grad work permit, even if you haven't been in Canada.
Right.
There are ways, or, they've done a lot of these kinds of things. They've put in a policy from within Canada to extend the post-grad work permit that normally isn't permitted. So they have tried to make it a little, soften the blow a little bit for some of the students and workers by putting together these policies that will help them. So, what I would say in these cases, normally that wouldn't be permitted, right? If you've done your studies overseas, you don't qualify, but right now there are measures in place. And I would suggest, it may be very much a situation of a case-by-case basis. So it's probably a good idea to reach out and get some professional legal advice on those types of tricky situations, because the policies are there and they probably can be used, but sometimes they have little nuances about when exactly you have to have completed your studies. Do you fall in this range? They're a little bit complicated. So, but they are there. And I think that, I think on that level, the government is aware that it's an issue and has been trying to make some improvements.
Right. Thank you, Shannon, for that. Now, Claire, I'll come back to you. And when I come to you, I say, now help me, people like me. Stuck before 18th of March, 2020, we got our permanent residencies. Then we had the luxury of time. So we decided, well, let's wait till the expiry of the medical's last date. And just a couple of days before, we'll just fly in. And then the pandemic set in, right? What is the status for such people? Because those are the ones. And, during the pandemic, I got to know that the people with, with medicals that had not expired, whose COPRs had not expired, they were flying in and they'd applied much later than us, but they were still flying in because theirs were valid. Now, what can one do in this situation? What would you suggest for someone whose PR was expired before this March 18th deadline, which was there? How do you help these guys? What would you suggest to them?
Yeah, so at the beginning of the pandemic, March, April, May of 2020, we were still seeing permanent residents who had received their landing documents prior to March 18th being able somewhat to travel to Canada and activate that permanent residency. Now, generally, those documents are issued for around a period of 6 to 8 months. So now, June 2021, where the travel restrictions haven't changed, we're not seeing any more of those applicants who were eligible prior to March 18th to travel. So we're getting into the situation of what happens when those COPR and those PR visa documents expire? How do we extend them? How can we get that person to Canada? And until now, we're not seeing a lot of consistency from an immigration approach in getting those documents extended. Most frequently, what we are seeing is immigration, reviewing the cases. They are extending medicals. Again, it's on a case-by-case basis. But until those travel restrictions are lifted, even for those individuals who still have the medical exam validity, they're looking at really having to get those COPR documents reissued with valid dates. We're looking at getting travel authorization letters for individuals with expired documents, which in conjunction with those documents could allow them to travel to Canada. Or alternatively, if they still have the valid documents, we can look at a different travel authorization. If they have a close family member in Canada, kind of bringing them in under a different travel exemption. The factor lately that's kind of complicated this even more within the last month or two is the ban on direct flights from India to Canada. Right. So, we've heard of a few cases where individuals had planned to travel to Canada within the validity of those documents, and unfortunately their travel plans were interrupted because of that travel ban. They simply just can't find, even indirect flights to travel to Canada. They're not available to travelers at this time. Again, a case-by-case basis, immigration is aware of the problem, and, they're working on their policies to really, when the travel restrictions lift, facilitate updating those documents, updating the system on the back end so that, those people can travel to Canada as soon as they can, and as soon as it's safe to do so.
No, and Claire, you made a very valid point. In fact, I was thinking of running to Russia and getting the Sputnik 5 dose and then flying to Canada, and then then your government saved me from getting banned because I believe Sputnik is not on the list of vaccinations you need to have to enter Canada in the coming months.
Not
Right.
yet.
So I want my listeners to know I did approach Mr. Stephen Green, who is the founder, and when we did our MOUs and agreed to work together, he was kind enough to help us on our application. And my application really did move. I've been waiting for 1.5 years. And the point of having such a great lawyer or a law firm like this on board and someone like Shannon and Claire, now I'm going to disperse their email IDs to you so that you can bombard them with your cases and they can maybe make you their clients. But on that note, when I did that, things really moved. I got my medical request, and then again, the pandemic set in. I got the medical done. And again, we are just waiting for things to open up maybe in July. So, Claire, one last thing on the PR front. Your forecast, I understood everything of the sorts, but what about people post 18, post March 18, 2021? You're saying it's changed in a way, but I have a group of, let's say, 1,000 people on one of the chats, all right? As a lawyer, I'm fighting for fraud for them with regards to agents and stuff, right? Who've been stuck, whose applications were in place. And some of them did get approved, right? And those guys are also in the wait. So is there a difference between the two in terms of processing, or now everything is going to be in the same pool? I mean, the post and the pre-18 concept has merged into one, or there is still a chance that that they're going to be processed differently than the people who already got their PCOPRs approved and then expired?
Well, I think the processing is relatively the same. They're kind of two different groups. The first of which, have the approval but don't have the valid documents anymore. The second of which, maybe they don't have the approval or they have it, but the travel restrictions preclude their actual entry to Canada. So for those people who do have approvals, they have the valid documents, they're going to need to see whether they do have the ability to travel under a different restriction. So if they do have a close family member in Canada or an extended family member in Canada, can we get them authorization linked to that person to come to Canada and activate their permanent resident status as kind of a secondary purpose for entry? Those people who don't fall within that category, unfortunately, we're looking at a waiting game until those travel restrictions are lifted. And as of now, the Canadian government has somewhat indicated that there may be changes coming down the pipeline as our vaccination rates do kind of increase. But as of now, we have no timelines as to when those travel restrictions themselves will either be lifted or amended. So I would say a case-by-case basis for those people, but again, it's really based on the March 18th kind of cutoff for 2020 and looking at how those travel restrictions play out in the coming months, and will that person be able to travel on their permanent residence documents before their expiry.
All right, Claire, thank you so much for that. Shannon, coming back to you. Now I'm going to talk about the whole forgery thing that happens through agents on work permits. I think you're the expert on that, on how deceptive this can be. And I have an incident to narrate on this where a couple of engineers approached me with an application where they said we have been deceived, right? And we filed a criminal case in our local courts against them for deception. And these agents were sitting in Dubai. When they did these applications, they were basically work permits, LMIA approvals that came from somewhere in British Columbia, and these approvals were just the same. Everything on the document was same except for the name, and they even had the Canadian IRCC details on the documents forged. And when I looked at them closely, I mean, I didn't have the experience, and I cannot practice immigration. So when I started looking as a lawyer, you start perusing the documents. I said, well, it's an identity theft. That everything is similar, including your pay package, how you're going to stay at the site, what's happening. And this is something which is now coming out to be quite common, that people in Asia end up paying for work permits rather than them being offered, jobs. Now, could you decipher this for our people, that how it is a criminal offense to actually source a work permit or a job in order to get a work permit in, the whole LMIA thing?
Yeah, well, I mean, anytime we're doing a work permit application, I mean, one of the key factors is it legitimate? Is there a legitimate job offer in Canada associated with this work permit? So if there's any sense, and government officials are trained to look for anything that isn't legitimate, they're not new to this, right? They do know how to identify these things. They do pick up on them often. They know what questions to ask. They know what to look for. So, I mean, I'm certain things get through, but it's also a very risky game to play. If there is any sense that what you've submitted is not for a real job, say you've paid for a job that doesn't really exist, that kind of scenario, then you run the risk of being found to have misrepresented yourself. And that has very serious consequences, barring you from entry to Canada. And any future applications, if it's important for you to get to Canada, are going to be highly, highly scrutinized, even if once that bar is lifted. So it has very serious implications. I mean, I would really recommend, if you have a legitimate job offer, then absolutely go for it. But that's what we do. We do that kind of work all the time. And those go smoothly largely because they are legitimate. We can show the information that we need to show. And I know, a lot of people, they have personal reasons that they really want to get to Canada, but the best thing to do is really look for a legitimate job, a real job. You shouldn't be paying someone for a job. That's a huge red flag. There's no reason you should have to pay for a job, and do everything you can to just make sure that the people you're talking to really are working in your best interest and aren't just, taking your money and running because, on my end, for example, the work we do, I don't find people jobs. That's not part of what I do because I don't want to get involved in that. People come to me with jobs that are already in place. The employer is involved. Everybody's involved. And we know that it's a real job. So if someone's telling you to pay them some money and they'll find you a job, definitely be very, very leery of that and be very careful because you're going to lose money and you're not going to end up in Canada in the end anyways. And even if for some reason it works out and you manage to get there, but you arrive and there is no job, then how are you going to get permanent residence down the road? Because you're not going to be able to prove that you did the work. You'll go see Claire and Claire will tell you, well, you didn't do any work, so I can't get you any points and I can't get the documentation you need. So now you're stuck there as well.
No, and Shannon, you made a right point. You know why? Because now when we are scouting the market and, since we've seen, especially Punjab in India, I'm sure you're aware how many applications comes from this province in India, where people are just gung-ho about moving overseas, whether it's Canada, Australia, UK, and you see most of the influx from China, apart from India and Pakistan and other countries. The problem is these agents have started selling these jobs. You said, and some of them have come back to me. I was on a call with one of these gentlemen as I did an undercover thing with them, being a lawyer. I said, well, I need a prospective job in British Columbia. Can you help me with that? The guy said, I can get you a job in $70,000. And I'm like, what the hell? How is it possible to get that's an expensive job. And it was not only a job, it was a job as a senior manager somewhere in the OONOC code, somewhere in a big four. And I have worked with PricewaterhouseCoopers for ages before I started my own practice and my own law firm. And I don't believe a big four, something like a PricewaterhouseCoopers, will offer you a job for $70,000. But again, these people take this money and do it. So is it that there do exist such jobs? Because I don't know, people keep approaching us, and if you're a lawyer, you would have experienced this. Somebody approached me that I own a trucking company somewhere, and sir, I think I will get a job, but can you prosecute the agent because I did apply, but I did not get a job, and now they're stuck with all that money they've paid to this agent. But some of them do go overseas as, I don't know, drivers, lorry drivers, or I don't know what not. But there's a huge scam running in the country, and similar to that owner-operator scheme you had for work permits, where people went through those. In fact, I had spoken to Stephen a while back, and he told me the scheme is shut. But there was somebody who validly told me that you're wrong, the scheme is still operating. So maybe you could clear that also up for the audience, because people really need to know that it's not so easy to get a job anywhere. I mean, why would some countries sell their jobs and the immigration system say, hey, come in, through those jobs?
I think if you're paying for a job, chances are very strong that it's not a legitimate job. If someone really does want to hire you, they actually want to hire you, and they shouldn't be taking your money to hire you. You should be paid for a job, not paying for a job. So I think that's the biggest red flag. If someone tells you to give them some money for the job itself, it's most likely not legitimate. And certainly any reputable companies that you can find are not taking money for jobs. The large companies, the companies we deal with, our clients are not paying for jobs. And one thing to keep in mind, there's the labor market impact assessment process, which would be someone who's newly hired. But anything else like an intercompany transfer, you have to have been working for that company for a year. So you would know if you've been working for a company for a year that also has a company in Canada. That's part of the requirement. So if you haven't been working for the company for a year, you don't qualify for an intercompany transfer. And anybody that tells you differently is certainly to be, taken with a grain. It's not true. And so you should be cautious with that.
And I believe even if you've done this and you've somehow gotten through the whole process through your whatever games that people play, I believe that PR still can be cancelled if somebody reports, to the immigration authorities after a period of time, if you find out that this was done fraudulently to deceive the authorities. Am I correct?
Oh, yeah, they can do an investigation really at any time, whether you're, in Canada, even if you've made it to Canada, it could still be investigated. And also, it could come up down the road, like when you go to apply for permanent residence, then you're stuck trying to prove that you've done this job that you really haven't done. Or even you go to renew your permanent residence or apply for citizenship at any point in time in that whole process, if it comes to light that this was not you really didn't have a legitimate job, your whole status in Canada is at risk. So it's a risky game to play. Absolutely.
Thank you, Shannon,
and it'll
for
follow
that.
you for a long time.
Yeah. And let me tell you, there are these 5 bunch of friends, Australia, UK, New Zealand, and Canada, and I don't know what I'm missing, but they will find you because they share intelligence together. That as a lawyer working in the UN forum, I did my bit of research. So you're going to spoil your travel history for the rest of your life. You're going to be barred from a lot of countries. So you shouldn't be trying something like this in case you're planning to immigrate. Claire, coming to you. Now, the permanent residency fraud is something Shannon rightly spoke about, work permits. I want to talk to you about this whole permanent residency game from an owner-operator perspective, and also from buying a business in Canada perspective, where people do apply for permanent residency on the pretext where these agents, and I'm not saying there's a legit program in place. I have experienced this in India. When I was applying for my permanent residence about some years back, I kind of did my research, but I reached out to 2 very prominent agents in India, and they said, well, sir, you don't qualify as a lawyer to apply because your work is different than what it should be. All right. And this is when you go as a clean slate. And they said, what you can do is, why don't you invest $100,000 in a creche or buy a small business in Ontario, and we will show you as Shannon said, intercompany transfer, and we'll file your permanent residency, and nobody's going to check your tax documents, blah, 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 blah. And the whole thing sounded very shady from the word go. So in your experience, when somebody thinks of applying, and then they told me, well, if you don't fit in federal skilled worker, of course, the province is going to pick you up because you chose a business to invest in a province and start doing this. So Claire, is there something like this under the PNP available where people can actually think of these weird schemes to just go in and start with their application process, which doesn't sound right to the ear as we speak?
I think you're right, Amber, to question that. As of today, Canada really has no passive immigration investor program. Right. So any business that you're investing in is going to require you to actively manage that business. And one thing I would caution there is, typically those are 2-step programs. So most of the provinces do have what we call entrepreneur streams, which require the person to come to Canada, sign an agreement with the province, work for a period of a year or 2, meet those requirements, and then transition to permanent residency. And we always do caution, don't make an investment until you've spoken with the provinces, because a lot of the provinces have very clear warnings on their websites. Certain business types are precluded from the person participating in those provincial nominee programs. A lot of the provinces will want to see that investment being made after the person's arrived as a temporary resident. So anyone that's telling, a client, park this money in a business in Canada, it's a clear direct pathway to permanent residency, that's absolutely another red flag. Certainly there are legitimate entrepreneur programs, and we have the startup visa program, but those are all based on an applicant's active management of the business rather than a certain sum of money being invested into a Canadian vehicle.
All right. No, that's really important, because this whole gimmick of investing in programs within the provinces, it's not so cheap as well, I believe. There was this whole speculation during the pandemic, which people were going through, when some agents were showcasing the ad saying just invest 200,000 and you're there, and buy a farm and I don't know whatnot. And I thought, why would I buy a farm in Nova Scotia, and why would I pay $250,000 and just immigrate? That's not right, right? And that's the kind of stuff they sell you here. So it's not quite what we thought it would be. But thank you so much for your time and today highlighting these things. I'm going to take the last takes on this from you guys, and then of course I'll request the audience to get in touch with you probably post the show for their queries, and maybe you can make them your clients. And the first part there is your forecast for 2021. I have somebody who's written in and said, will I be still in my 30s by the time I get to Canada? So that's on a lighter note. I don't know. I can't answer that, buddy. Sorry, but maybe Claire and Shannon can decide. We've been waiting for 2 years, and what would you suggest that what would be the forecast for 2021 would be for people who are seeking jobs? And lastly, how much of it do you see opening, and people should be hopeful, they should be impatient? What do you suggest?
Well, I'll say I am very hopeful that we will soon start to see some changes in terms of travel restrictions. There are announcements about quarantine changes on the quarantine requirement for those who are fully vaccinated, and I think that's a first step. It doesn't necessarily help people who are outside of Canada get here, but once they do arrive, they won't have to quarantine as much, and it shows an opening of the mind to start thinking about reopening our borders. So I think we will see something. It might be slower than what we hoped for, but I do think we'll see some movement over the next little while, and I think that by the end of 2021, hopefully we'll be in a better position for people traveling to Canada to have more ability to enter and travel to Canada. So I do think we'll see some changes over the next little while. I mean, we kind of have to get back to something a little bit normal.
Right, Claire, and your take on this?
Yeah, I agree with you, Shannon. I'm very hopeful. I think throughout this whole period of kind of the unknown with the coronavirus, immigration has been really responsive. They've recognized the issues, and they've released policies to try to fix them as best they can while we're still kind of in the thick of the pandemic. And now that things are improving globally, I think they're aware of the issues, and they really want, they have immigration targets. Canada is definitely looking is for permanent residents especially, to increase their numbers, and they want to find ways to do that. I think a large part of that is going to be helping to transition foreign nationals who are outside of Canada onto permanent residency whenever it's safe to do so. So yeah, I think we've heard whisperings about the quarantine requirements. I think that's the first set of a lot of good news that's to come, and hopefully it is coming by the end of 2021.
Well, that's great news. Thank you so much. And I'll tell my audience that the quarantine news is great news, because you don't have to pay those $2,000 when you land at the airport. I don't know whether you have to or you don't, but I'm happy at least. And you don't have to eat the hotel food, which they show you on TV. I don't know what do they feed you, but again, you'll be treated to some good delights, and that's a good, exciting news to get hold of. Be patient. I'm sure if patience is the game, be patient, enjoy enjoy the Indian Delhi as much as you can, because you'll shortly be moving. And one thing out of experience I can totally say to my audience is that the immigration system in Canada is still way better than it is in any other country by far that I have seen or experienced during the pandemic, be it Australia, be it UK. There have been severe repercussions on permanent residents and or students, or for that matter of fact, even citizens returning to these countries. And I'm sure Canada is going to just continue doing a good job, and we'll be able to help you guys with these queries. Guys, can you just give your email ID so people maybe can write in directly to you instead of going on to the website where they only find a generic email ID? Maybe you can just give your IDs out there, and if someone has query, they can write into you.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I think that our IDs are published on our website as well, our personal
All right.
emails. So you can go
Right.
to our website and find Shannon and I's profile.
Right.
Mine is claireM@gans.com.
Right.
And I'm Shannon K at Gans.com. GANDS.com.
Right. And thank you so much, guys. Wonderful chatting with you. I'm going to have more of you coming in onto our show when we see these new developments coming in, so that we can maybe have more insight, and I'll be sending my application right away to you guys. Thank you so much, guys, for helping me out and being on the show. It was lovely chatting with you. Hope you have a great summer, and hope to see you soon shortly again. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks very much.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I'd like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred and Sia. Thank you so much for making this possible. We've had an amazing week on the network. Do check out The Note with Mahrukh Inayat. She speaks to Prabhat Kumar, the man leading child protection at one of India's leading NGOs, Save the Children. On The Habit Coach, Ashton was joined by Rajat Mittal Shah to talk about some superfoods in Ayurveda like turmeric and ashwagandha. On Paisa Vaisa, host Anupam Gupta has a digital gold special in 2 parts, one with Ashraf Rizvi, founder and CEO of Digital Swiss Code and Gilded, and one with Deepak Abbott, co-founder of India Gold. Listen to the first part of the Father's Day special of Agla Station Adulthood with Natasha and her father, Dr. Vipul Roy Rathod. You should also check out Cyrus Says' episode with Mukul Chadda. He talks about upcoming shows Sunflower and Sherni. Our Kannada podcast, Thale Artist, celebrates 100 episodes, and we had a reunion of hosts Pawan, Ganesh, and Surya who shared their favorite moments from the past. Shiva Mehta is back with the second season of Smile India. The show is available in both English and Hindi. On this episode, she talks about the conversion from bag teas to bagless ones and how we should ditch the plastic and have a great tea experience. And with that, I hope to see you again next week.
Working Monday to Friday glued to your chair making you feel dull? Worry not. Get your 5-minute weekly dose of travel around the world with postcards from nowhere. Join me every Thursday as I explore the strange, obscure, and fascinating parts of the world and bring out facets of travel you may not have thought of before. You can find us on the IVM Podcast app, website, or wherever you get your podcast from.